welcome back to the program, Crad. This is friend of the show, Crad.
It's me.
We're gonna get started tonight with the last two chapters of Penpal, the condensed version compared to the longer version that we've been reading. So, shouldn't take very long to go ahead and finish the book. Um, there's two chapters left, Screens and Friends, and I think they're about the same length. Do you have a preference on which one you read?
I do, but first I have to give you some unfortunate news.
Okay, you waited till the recording was starting to give me your unfortunate news.
No,
I'm kidding.
I waited until the moment I found out the record. I waited until the moment I pressed the record button and the record button didn't work to tell you the unfortunate news of my record button isn't working.
Okay. Well,
I will open a voice memo on my phone and we will simply hope it works.
that's all right. I mean, we'll do what we gotta do.
Nope, to record voice memos and call. God fucking damn it. Okay.
It's fine. I'm recording you right now, and so far you're coming through fine.
Okay, that okay. All right, that's good.
So,
I tried making two different QuickTime recordings and neither of them are working, and I'm just like, bro, what the fuck? So
mm-hmm. So you said you have a
I
preference on which chapter you read. Go ahead and tell me what
I
that preference is.
I actually don't like screens as a chapter. It's just like the most boring one to me.
Okay. So you would like to read Friends.
Yeah,
Okay, that works out. I would like to read Screens. I like Screens. I mean,
I don't.
it's pretty long, and it has a very it starts out very dry, but I think the stuff at the end is fun.
I have like the attention span of a 4-year-old,
I
so
see. Okay. Well, I'll take care of Screens then.
sounds
And
good.
if there's no more stuff we have to go over, then I'll go ahead and get started. I have just a glass of milk here. It's just milk. Uh,
Milky
I think I got up.
slurp slurp.
I think I got up intending to prepare a real drink, and I was just looked at the milk and I was like, "Fuck it, milk moment."
Milk. I mean, when I have a milk moment,
All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. That's enough out of you. Here we go. Chapter 5 Screens. I've intentionally withheld some details from a lot of my stories. I've let my hopes concerning the way things might be influence my evaluation of the way they actually are. But I don't think there's any point to that anymore. At the end of the summer between kindergarten and first grade, I got the stomach flu. This has all the components of the regular flu. However, with the stomach flu, you throw up in a bucket and not the toilet because you're sitting on it. This lasted for about 10 days, but just before it had passed, the sickness was granted an extension in the form of pink eye. My eyelids were so fused together by the dried mucus generated during the night that the first day I awoke with the infection, I thought I had gone blind. When I started first grade, I had a kink in my neck from 10 days of bed rest and two swollen, bloodshot eyes. Josh was in another group and didn't have my lunch, so in a cafeteria bursting with 200 kids, I had a table to myself. I started keeping spare food in my backpack that I would take into the bathroom to eat after lunch, since my school meals were usually confiscated by older kids who knew I wouldn't stand up to them since no one would stand with me. This dynamic persisted even after my condition cleared up, since no one wants to be friends with the kid who gets bullied, lest they have some of that aggression directed toward themselves. The only reason this stopped was due to the actions of a kid named Alex. Alex was in the third grade, and was bigger than most of the other kids in any grade. Around the third week of school, he started sitting with me at lunch, and this put an immediate end to the shortage of my food supply. He was nice enough, but he seemed kinda slow. We never really talked at length, except for when I finally decided to ask why he had been sitting with me. He had a crush on Josh's sister Veronica. Veronica was in the fourth grade and was probably the prettiest girl in school. Even as a 6-year-old who fully endorsed the notion that girls were disgusting, I still knew how pretty Veronica was. When she was in third grade, Josh told me two boys had actually gotten into a physical fight, which erupted out of an argument concerning the significance of the messages she had written in their yearbooks. One of the boys eventually hit the other in the forehead with the corner of the yearbook, and the wound required stitches to close. While not one of those boys, Alex wanted her to like him and confessed that he knew Josh and I were best friends. I gathered that he had hoped that I would convey his ostensibly philanthropic deed to Veronica, and that she would presumably be so moved by his selflessness that she'd take an interest in him. If I told her, he would continue to sit with me for as long as I needed him to. Because this was during the time when Josh mostly stayed at my house building the raft and navigating the tributary with me, I didn't have a chance to bring it up to Veronica. I simply didn't see her. I told Josh about it and he made fun of Alex, but said that he would tell his sister since I wanted him to. I doubted that he would. Josh was annoyed that people seemed to be so taken with his sister. I remember him calling her an ugly crow. I never said anything to Josh, but I remember wanting to say, even then, that she was pretty and would one day be beautiful. When I was 15, I was seeing a movie at a place with my friends. The, the, when I was 15, I was seeing a movie at a place my friends and I had come to call the Dirt Theater. It was probably nice at one point, but time and neglect had withered the place severely. This theater had movable tables and chairs on a level floor, so when the theater was full, there were very few places you could sit and see the whole screen. The theater was still open, I imagine, for three reasons. It was cheap to see a movie there. They showed a different cult movie twice a month at midnight. And three, they sold beer to underage kids during the midnight showings. I went for the first two, and that night they were showing Scanners by David Cronenberg for $1. My friends and I were sitting at the very back. I wanted to sit closer to the front for a better view, but Ryan had driven us, so I relented. A couple minutes before the movie started, a group of girls walked in. They were all pretty attractive, but whatever beauty they might have had was eclipsed by the girl with the dirty blonde hair, even though I'd only caught a glimpse of her profile. As she turned to move her seat, I caught a full view of her face, which gave me the feeling of butterflies in my stomach. It was Veronica. I hadn't seen her in a long time. Josh and I saw progressively less of one another after we snuck out to my old house that night when we were 10, and usually when I visited him, she would be out with friends. While everyone stared at the screen, I stared at Veronica, only looking away when the feeling that I was being a creep overcame me, but that feeling would subside and my eyes would return to her. She really was beautiful, just like I'd thought she'd be when I was a kid. When the credits started to roll, my friends got up and left. There was only one exit, and they didn't want to be trapped waiting for a crowd to clear. I lingered in hopes of catching Veronica's attention. As she and her friends walked by, I took a chance. "Hey, Veronica." She turned toward me, looking a little startled. "Yeah?" I got out of my seat and stepped a little into the light coming through the open door. "It's me, Josh's old friend from way back. How have you been?" "Oh my god, hey, it's been so long." She motioned to her friends that she'd be out in a second. Yeah, a few years at least. Not since the last time I stayed over with Josh. How is he?" "Oh, that's right, I remember all your guys' games. Do you still play Ninja Turtles with your friends?" She laughed a little and I blushed. "No, I'm not a kid anymore. Me and my friends play X-Men now." I was really hoping she'd laugh. She did. "Do you come to these movies every time?" Does she think I'm cute? Does she think I'm funny? Does she think I'm attractive? I suddenly realized that she had asked me a question, and my mind grasped for what it was. Yeah, I said, much too loudly. "Yeah, I try to anyway. What about you?" "I come every now and then. My boyfriend didn't like these movies, but we just broke up, so I plan on coming from now on." I was trying to be casual, but failed. "Oh, well, that's cool. Not that you guys broke up. I just meant that you'd be able to come more often." She laughed again. I tried to recover. "So, are you coming the week after next? It's supposed to show Day of the Dead. It's really cool." "Yeah, I'll be there." She smiled, and I was about to suggest that maybe we could sit together when she quickly closed the space between us and hugged me. "It's really good to see you," she said with her arms around me. I was trying to think of what to say when I realized the biggest problem was that I had forgotten how to talk. Luckily, Ryan, who I could hear approaching from the hallway, came in and spoke for me. "Dude, you know the movie's over, right? Let's get the fuck out." "Oh, yeah." That's so stupid. Veronica let go and said that she'd see me next time. She was played out of the room by the porn music Ryan was making with his mouth. I was furious, but it dissipated as soon as I heard Veronica laughing in the lobby. Day of the Dead couldn't come soon enough. Ryan's family was going out of town, so he wouldn't be able to drive us, and the other friends I was with that night didn't have cars. A couple of days before the movie, I asked my mom if she could take me. She responded almost immediately by denying my request, but I persisted, and she picked up on the desperation in my voice. She asked why I wanted to go so badly since I'd seen the movie before. I hesitated before saying that I was hoping to see a girl there. She smiled and asked playfully if she knew the girl, and I reluctantly told her it was Veronica. The smile disappeared from her face, and she coldly said, "No."
Damn.
Yeah, for real. I decided that I would call Veronica to see if she could pick me up. Oh, geez, that's attractive. I had no idea if she still lived at home, but it was worth a try. But then I realized Josh might answer. I hadn't talked to him in almost 3 years, and if he answered, I obviously couldn't ask to talk to his sister. I felt guilty for calling to speak with Veronica and not Josh, but I dismissed that feeling. Josh hadn't called me in years either. I picked up the phone and dialed the number that was still embedded in my muscle memory from having dialed it so often all those years ago. It rang several times before someone picked up, but it wasn't Josh. I felt a mixture of both relief and disappointment. I realized that in that second I really missed Josh. I would call after this weekend and talk to him, but this was my only chance to see if Veronica could take me, so I asked for her. But the person told me I'd dialed the wrong number. I repeated the number back to her, and she confirmed, said they must have changed their number, and I agreed. I apologized for the disturbance and hung up. I was suddenly intensely sad because now I couldn't contact Josh even if I wanted to. I felt terrible for having been afraid that he might answer the phone. He'd been my best friend. I realized that the only way I could be put back in touch with him now would be through Veronica. So now, not that I needed one, I had another reason to see her. I told my mom the day before the movie that I was no longer concerned with going, but was hoping she could drop me off at my friend Chris's house. She relented and dropped me off that Saturday, a couple hours before the movie. My plan was to walk from his house to the theater, since he only lived about a half-mile away. They went to church early on Sundays, so his parents would go to sleep early Saturday night, and Chris was fine with not coming with me since he had planned on chatting with this girl he met online. He said the walk back to his house would be even lonelier after she laughed in my face when I tried to kiss her, and I told him not to electrocute himself when he tried to have sex with his computer. And I left his house at 11:15. I tried to pace myself so I'd get there just a little before the movie. I was going by myself, and so I didn't want to just hang around there waiting. On the way to the theater, I figured that if Veronica showed up at all, it would be too lucky for us to arrive at the same time. So I debated whether I should wait outside or just go in. Both had their pros and cons. As I was grappling with these concerns, I noticed that the steady stream of streaking car lights that had been overtaking me had been replaced by a single, constant spotlight that refused to pass. The road wasn't illuminated by streetlights, so I was walking in the grass with the road about 2 feet to my left. I stepped a little more to my right and craned my neck over my left shoulder to see what was behind me. It was a car that had stopped about 10 feet back. All I could see were the violently bright headlights that were cutting through the otherwise Stygian surroundings. I thought that might be one of Chris's parents. Maybe they'd come to check in on us and seen that I was gone. It wouldn't have taken much pressing for Chris to confess. I took one step toward the car, and it broke its pause and started driving toward me at a slow pace. It passed me, and I saw that it wasn't Chris's parents' car, or any car that I recognized for that matter. I tried to see the driver, but it was too dark, and my pupils had shrunk when faced with the blinding lights from the car just moments before. He adjusted enough so that I could see a tremendous crack in the back window of the car as it drove away. I didn't think much of the whole affair. Some people find it fun to scare other people. I would often hide around corners and jump out at my mom. Yeah, that's the same thing. I timed it right, got there about 10 minutes before the movie. I decided to wait outside until around 11:57, since that would give me time to find her inside if she was already seated. As I was considering the possibility that she might not show, I saw her. She was alone, and she was beautiful. I waved to her and walked to close the distance. She smiled and asked if my friends were already inside. I said that they weren't, and realized that this must seem like I was trying to make it a date. But she didn't seem bothered by that, nor was she bothered when I handed her the ticket I had already bought. She looked at me quizzically, and I said, "Don't worry, I'm rich." And she laughed, and we went inside. I bought us one popcorn and 2 drinks, and spent most of the movie debating whether or not I should time reaching my hand into the popcorn bag when she reached in so that they would touch. She seemed to enjoy the movie, and before I knew it, it was over. We didn't linger in the theater, and because this was a midnight show, we couldn't loiter in the lobby, so we just walked outside. The parking lot of the theater was big because it connected with a mall that had gone out of business. Not wanting the night to be over just yet, I continued the conversation while casually walking toward the old mall. As we were about to round the corner and leave the theater out of sight, I looked back and saw that her car wasn't the only one left in the parking lot. There was another one that had a large crack in the back window. My immediate uneasiness turned to understanding. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The driver of that car works here, and he must have figured I was on my way up to the movie. Injecting real horror into the life of a horror fan seemed like an obvious move. We walked around the mall and talked about the movie. I told her I thought Day of the Dead was better than Dawn of the Dead, but she would not agree. I told her when I called her old number about my dilemma about who would answer the phone. She didn't find it as funny as I did, but she took my phone and put her number in it. She commented that it might be the worst cell phone she'd ever seen. Her evaluation was not rescinded when I told her I couldn't even receive pictures on it. I called her so she'd have my number, and she put it in. Told me she was graduating, but she hadn't done well in school so far that year and wasn't sure if she'd even get into college. I told her to attach a picture of herself to the application, and they'd pay her to go there just so they could look at her. She didn't laugh at that one, and I thought she might be offended. She might have thought I was implying that she couldn't get in based on her intelligence. I nervously glanced at her, and she was just smiling, and even in this poor light I could see that she was blushing. I wanted to hold her hand, but I didn't. As we walked down the final side of the mall back toward the theater, I asked her about Josh. She told me she didn't want to talk about it. I asked her if he was at least doing alright, and she just said, I don't know. Figured Josh must have taken a wrong turn somewhere and started getting into trouble. I felt bad. I felt guilty. As we approached the parking lot, I noticed that the car with the cracked back window was gone, and that her car was now the only one there. She asked me if I needed a ride, and even though I really didn't, I said that I'd appreciate it. I had drunk my whole soda during the movie, and all the walking was putting pressure on my bladder. I knew that I could wait until I was back at Chris's, but I decided that I was going to try to kiss her when she dropped me off. I didn't want this biological nagging to rush me out of the car. This would be my first kiss. I could think of no ruse to conceal what I needed to do. The theater had long closed, so I had only one option. Told her that I was going to go behind the theater to piss, but that I'd be back in 2 shakes. It was obvious that I thought it was hilarious, and she seemed to laugh more at how funny I found it than how funny it actually was. Not 2 shakes, bro. On the way toward the theater, I stopped and turned toward her. I asked her if Josh had ever told her that that kid named Alex had done something nice for me. She paused to think for a moment and said that he had. She inquired as to why I asked, but I said it was nothing. Josh really was a good friend. When I went to go behind the theater, I realized that there was still a chain link fence extending off and running parallel to the walls of the building. Where I stood, she could still see me, and the fence seemed to stretch on endlessly. So I thought I'd just hop it, duck out of sight, and return as quickly as I could. It may have been too much of an effort, but I thought it was polite. I climbed the fence and walked just a little ways until I was out of sight and urinated. For a moment, the only sounds were the crickets in the grass behind me and the collision of liquid and cement. These sounds were overpowered by a noise I can still hear when it's quiet, and when there are no other noises to distract my ears. In the distance, excuse me, in the distance, I heard a faint screeching which quickly subsided, only to be replaced with a cascade of thundering vibrations. I realized quickly enough what it was. It was a car. The growling of the engine got louder, and then I thought, no, not louder. Closer. As soon as I realized this, I started back toward the fence, but before I could get very far at all, I heard a brief, truncated scream, and the roar of the engine terminated in a deafening thud. I started running, but only after 2 or 3 steps I was tripped by a loose piece of stone and fell hard and fast onto the concrete, my head striking the corner of the chair as I fell. I was dazed for maybe 30 seconds, but the renewed rumbling of the engine drew my senses back and my equilibrium was restored by adrenaline. I redoubled my efforts. I was worried that whoever had crashed the car might harass Veronica. As I was climbing over the fence, I saw that there was still only one car in the parking lot. Didn't see any evidence of a crash. Thought that I might have misjudged its direction or proximity. As I ran toward Veronica's car, my orientation changed, and I saw what the car had hit. My legs stopped working almost completely. It was Veronica. Her car was sitting between us, and as I closed the distance and walked around it, she came fully into view. Her body was twisted and crumpled like a discarded figure, meant to represent a catalog of things the human body cannot do. I could see the bone of her right shin cutting through her jeans, and her left arm was wrapped so hard around the back of her neck that her hand fell on her right breast. Her head was craned back, and her mouth hung widely open toward the sky. There was so much blood. As I looked at her, I actually found it hard to discern whether she was laying on her back or her stomach, and this optical illusion made me feel sick. When you're confronted with something in the world that simply doesn't belong, your mind tries to convince itself that it's dreaming, and to that end it provides you with that distinct sense of all things moving slowly, as if through sap. In that moment I honestly felt that I would wake up at any minute, but I didn't wake up. I fumbled with my phone to call for help, but I had no signal. I could see Veronica's phone sticking out of what I thought was her front right pocket, and I had no choice. Trembling, I reached for her phone, and as I slid it out, she moved and gasped for air so violently that it seemed as if she was trying to breathe in the whole world. This startled me so much that I staggered back and fell onto the asphalt with her phone in my hand. She was trying to adjust her body to get it into its natural position, but with every spasm and jerk I could hear the cracking and grinding of her bones. Without thinking, I scrambled over to her and put my face over hers and just said, Veronica, okay, don't move, okay? Just stay still, don't move. Veronica, please, just don't move. I kept saying it, but the words started to fall apart as tears came streaming down my face. I opened her phone. It still worked. It was on the screen where she had saved my number, and when I saw that, I felt my heart break a little. I called 911 and waited with her, telling her that she would be okay, and feeling guilty for lying every time I said it. With the sound of sirens, when the sound of sirens tore through the air, she seemed to become more alert. She had remained conscious since I found her, but now more of the light was coming back into her eyes. Her brain was still protecting her from the pain, though it looked as if she was finally allowing her. It was finally allowing her to become aware that something was terribly wrong with her. Her eyes rolled to mine, and her lips moved. She was struggling, but I heard her. Picture. My picture. He took it. I didn't understand what she meant, somehow. So I said the only thing I could, which was, I'm so sorry, Veronica. I rode with her in the ambulance where she finally lost consciousness. I waited in the room that they had reserved for her. I still had her phone, so I put it in her purse and I called my mom from the hospital phone. It was about 4 a.m. Told her that I was fine, but that Veronica was not. She cursed at me and said she'd be right there, but I told her I wasn't leaving until Veronica was out of surgery. She said she would come anyway. My mom and I didn't speak much. I told her I was sorry for lying, and she said we'd talk about that later. I think that we I think that had we talked more in that room, if I'd just told her about boxes or the night with the raft, if she just told me more of what she knew, I think that things would have changed. But we sat there in silence. She told me that she loved me, and I could call her whenever I wanted her to come get me. As my mom was leaving, Veronica's parents rushed in. Her dad and my mom exchanged a few words that appeared to be quite serious, while Veronica's mother talked to the person at the desk. Her mother was a nurse, but didn't work at this hospital. I'm sure that she had tried to get Veronica transferred, but her condition was prohibitive. Excuse me. While we waited, the police came in and talked to each of us. I told them what happened, they made some notes, and they left. She came out of surgery, and 90% of her body was covered in a thick white cast. Her right arm was free, but the rest of her was bound like a cocoon. She was still under, but I remembered how I felt when I had my cast before kindergarten. I asked the nurse for a marker, but I couldn't think of anything to write. I slept on a chair in the corner, and I went home the next day. I came back every afternoon for several days. At some point, they had moved another patient into her room and set up a screen around Veronica's bed to act as a partition. She didn't seem to be feeling better, but she made more moments. She had more moments. I think that's supposed to say she had more moments of lucidity. It says she made more moments of lucidity. Come on, Redditors, get it together. But even during these periods, we wouldn't really talk. Her jaw had been broken by the car, so the doctors had wired it shut. I sat with her for a while, but there was nothing much I could say. I got up and walked over to her. I kissed her on the forehead, and she whispered through her clenched teeth, Josh. This surprised me a little. I looked at her and said, Has he not come to see you? No. I found myself really irritated. Even if Josh has been getting into trouble, he could still come see his sister. I was about to express this when she said, No, Josh. He ran away. I should have told you. I felt my blood turn to ice. When? When did that happen? When he was 13? Did he leave a note or something on his pillow. She started crying and I followed her, but I think now that we were crying for different reasons. Maybe I didn't realize it. At this point, there were a lot of things I still didn't remember about my childhood, and there were a lot of connections I hadn't yet made. I told her I had to go, but she could text me anytime. I got a text from her the next day, telling me not to come back. I asked why, and she said she didn't want me to see her like that again. I agreed begrudgingly. We texted each other every day, though I kept this from my mom because I knew that she didn't like me talking to Veronica. Usually her texts were fairly short and mostly in response to more lengthy texts that I would send her. Cocked. I tried calling her only once. I was sure she was screening her calls, but hoped I could hear her voice. She picked up, but didn't say anything. I could hear how labored her breathing was. About a week after she told me not to come see her anymore, she sent me a text that simply read, "I love you." I was filled with so many different emotions, but I responded by expressing the most prevalent one. I replied, "I love you too." She said that she wanted to be with me and that she couldn't wait until she could see me again. She told me that she had been released and was convalescing at her house. These exchanges carried on for several weeks, but every time I asked to come see her, she would say soon. I kept insisting that the following I kept insisting in the following week she said that she thought she might be able to make it to the next midnight movie. I couldn't believe it, but she insisted that she would try. I got a text from her from the afternoon of the movie saying, "See you tonight." I got Ryan to drive me since Chris's parents had found out what happened and said I wasn't welcome at their house anymore. Ugh. I explained to Ryan that she might be in bad shape, but that I really cared about her, so to give us some space. He accepted that, and we headed down there, but Veronica didn't show. I had saved her a seat right next to me, near the exit so she could get in and out easily, but 10 minutes into the movie, a man slid into the chair. I whispered, "Excuse me, the seat is taken," but he didn't respond at all. He just stared ahead at the screen. I remember wanting to move because there was something wrong with the way he was breathing, but I forfeited because I realized she wasn't coming. I texted her the next day asking if she was alright, and I inquired as to why she didn't show the previous night. She responded with what would turn out to be the last message I would receive. It simply said, "See you again, soon." Excuse me. She was clearly delirious, and I was worried about her. I sent her several replies reminding her about the movie, saying it was no big deal, but she just stopped replying. I grew increasingly upset over the next several days. I couldn't reach her at her home because I didn't know that number, and I wasn't even sure where they lived. My mood became increasingly depressed, and my mother, who had been really nice as of late, asked me if I was okay. I told her I hadn't heard from Veronica in days, and I felt all the warmth leave her disposition. "What do you mean?" "She was supposed to meet me at the movie yesterday, and I know it's only been like 3 weeks since she got hit, but she said she would try to come. After that, she just stopped talking to me altogether. I don't know, maybe she hates me." She looked confused, and I could read on her face that she was trying to tell if my mind had simply broken. When she saw that it hadn't, her eyes began to water, and she pulled me toward her, embracing me. She was beginning to sob, but it seemed too intense a reaction to my problem, and I had no reason to think that she particularly cared for Veronica. She drew in a shuddering breath, and then said something that still makes me nauseous even now. She said, "Veronica's dead, sweetheart. Oh, God, I thought you knew. She died on the last day you visited her. Oh, baby, she died weeks ago." She had completely broken down, but I knew it wasn't because of Veronica. I broke the embrace and staggered backwards. My mind was swimming. That wasn't possible. I had just exchanged messages with her yesterday. I could only think to ask one question, and it was probably the most trivial one I could ask. "Then why is her phone still on?" She continued sobbing. She didn't answer. "Why did it take them so long to shut off her goddamn phone?" Her crying broke enough to mutter the words, "The pictures." I would come to find out that her parents thought that her phone had been lost in the accident, despite the fact that I had put it in her purse the night she had been brought to the hospital. When they retrieved her belongings, the phone was not among them. They intended to contact the phone company at the end of the billing cycle to deactivate the line, but they received a call informing them of a massive impending charge for hundreds of pictures that had been sent from her phone. Pictures that were all sent to my phone, pictures that I never got because my phone couldn't receive them. They learned that they were all sent after the night she died. They deactivated the phone immediately. I tried not to think about the contents of those pictures, but I remember wondering for some reason whether I would have been in any of them. My mouth went dry, and I felt the painful sting of despair as I thought of the last message I had received from her phone. See you again soon. End of chapter.
Dun dun.
That's pretty fun. I mean, I like the ending. I don't know. I think you're right. It's maybe not that good.
Hmm.
I think what happened was when I was 15 and I read this, I was like, "Oh, dude, a 15-year-old dating an 18-year-old? That's normal." But as a 22-year-old, I realized it's not normal.
The scene at the beginning where oh god, what was it? There's something I was gonna make a funny comment and then there just wasn't an opportune time.
Mhm.
When they're talking about what was it, the corner, something about the
The corner? Let me look.
corners or something.
The corners? When?
Yeah.
What scene is this in?
It's somewhere in that chapter. I don't know, just Command F corner. Oh, I know. Think about the yearbooks.
Oh, the
Um,
corner of the yearbook. Yes.
it, I bet like $5 right now that like in the book version, that whole scene is written out to be like a direct like fully written physical fight where like the messages are like said aloud and everything.
Yeah, probably there's dialogue for it and everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's actually
exactly.
there's actually 5 mentions of corner in this story. This guy's kind of obsessed with corners.
Yeah.
He sleeps on a chair in the corner. His head strikes the
Oh
corner of a
my
chair when he
god.
falls. He jumps out around corners and scares his mom. He rounds the
That's
corner and
just
leaves the theater out of sight. The kid hits head with the corner of the
why
yearbook.
in his
I mean, I understand that corners are very important to society. I
mm.
mean, they have their own folk. Anyways,
Anyways,
now you're gonna
um,
read Friends. Frères.
yes, it is time for the finale. You've seen all of the individual pieces, and now you're going to see how they're all put together.
You've seen the
Um,
rest. Get ready for the best.
if there's a point where I cut out, just like cut me off, and I'll just restart the paragraph so that we get the full
Sure.
recording of
Yeah. Go right ahead. The floor is all yours.
it. On the first day of kindergarten, my mother had elected to drive me to school. We were both nervous, and she wanted to be there with me all the way up to the moment I walked into class. It took me a bit longer to get ready in the morning due to my still mending arm. The cast came up a couple inches past my elbow, which meant that I had to cover the entire arm with a specially designed latex bag when I showered. The bag was built to pull tight around the opening in order to seal out any water that might otherwise destroy the cast. I'd gotten really adept at cinching the bag myself. That morning, however, perhaps due to my excitement or nervousness, I hadn't pulled the strap tight enough, and halfway through the shower, I could feel water pooling inside the bag around my fingers. I jumped out and tore the latex shield away, but I could feel that previously rigid plaster had become soft after absorbing water. Because there's no way to effectively clean the area between your body and a cast, the dead skin that would normally have fallen away merely sits there. When stirred by moisture, like sweat, it emits an odor, and apparently this odor is proportionate to the amount of moisture introduced, because soon after I attempted to dry it, I was struck by the powerful stench of rot. As I continued to frantically rub it with the towel, it began to disintegrate. I was growing increasingly distressed. I had put as much effort as a child could into his very first day of school. I had sat with my mom picking out clothes the night before, I had spent a great deal of time picking up my backpack, and I had become exceedingly excited to show everyone that my lunchbox had the Ninja Turtles on it. I'd fallen into my mom's habit of calling these children I hadn't yet met my friends already, But as the condition of my cast worsened, I became deeply upset at the thought that surely I wouldn't be able to apply that label to anyone by the time this day was over. Defeated, I showed my mom. It took 30 minutes to get most of the moisture out while working to preserve the rest of the cast. To address the problem of the smell, my mom cut slivers of a bar of soap and slid them down into the cast, and then rubbed the remainder of the soap on the outside in an attempt to cocoon the rancid smell with a more pleasant one. By the time we arrived at the school, my classmates were already engaged in their second activity, and I was shoehorned into one of the groups. I wasn't made very clear on what the guidelines of the activity were, and within about 5 minutes, I had violated the rules so badly that each member of the group complained to the teacher and asked why I had to be in their group. I had brought a marker to school in hopes that I could collect some signatures or drawings on my cast next to my mother's, and I suddenly felt very foolish for having even put the marker into my pocket that morning. Kindergarteners had lunchroom to themselves at my elementary school, but some of the tables were off limits, so I didn't have to sit alone. I was self-consciously picking at the fraying ends of my cast when a kid sat across from me. "I like your lunchbox," he said. I could tell he was making fun of me, and I grew really angry. In my mind, that lunchbox was the last good thing about my day. I didn't look up from my arm, and I felt a burning in my eyes from the tears that I was holding back. I looked up to tell the kid to leave me alone, but before I could get the words out, I saw something that made me pause. He had the exact same lunchbox. I laughed. "I like your lunchbox, too." "I think Michelangelo is the coolest," he said, while miming nunchuck moves. I was in the middle of rebutting by saying that Raphael was my favorite when he knocked his open carton of milk off the table and into his lap. I tried very hard to stifle my laughter since I didn't know him at all, but the struggling look on my face must have struck him as funny because he started laughing first. Suddenly, I didn't feel so bad about my cast and thought that this person would hardly notice now anyway. Just then, I thought to try my luck. "Hey, do you want to sign my cast?" As I pulled out the marker, he asked me how I broke it. I told him that I fell out of the tallest tree in my neighborhood. He seemed impressed. I watched him laboriously draw his name, and when he was done, I asked what it said. He told me it said Josh. Josh and I had lunch together every day, and whenever we could, we partnered up for projects. I helped him with his handwriting, and he took the blame when I wrote fart on the wall in permanent marker. I would come to know other kids, but I think I knew that even then that Josh was my only real friend. Moving a friendship outside of school when you are 5 years old is actually more difficult than most remember. The day we launched our balloons, we had such a good time that I asked Josh if he wanted to come to my house the next day to play. He said he did and that he'd bring some of his toys. I said that we could also go exploring and maybe swim in the lake. When I got home, I asked my mom, and she said it would be fine. My enthusiasm was boundless until I realized that I had no way of contacting Josh to tell him. I spent the whole week worrying that our friendship would be dissolved by Monday. When I saw him after the weekend, I was relieved to find that he had run into the same obstacle and thought that was funny. Later that week, we both remembered to write down our phone numbers at home and then exchange them at school. My mom spoke with Josh's dad, and it was decided that my mom would pick Josh and myself up from school that Friday. We alternated this basic structure nearly every weekend. The fact that we lived so close together made it much easier on our parents, who seemed to work constantly. When my mom and I moved across the city at the end of first grade, I was sure that our friendship had seen its last day. As we drove away from the house that I had lived in my whole life, I felt a sadness that I knew wasn't just about a house. I was saying goodbye to my friend forever. But Josh and I, to my surprise and delight, stayed close. Despite the fact that we spent the majority of our time apart and only saw one another on weekends, we remained remarkably similar as we grew. Our personalities coalesced, our senses of humor complemented each other's, and we would find that we had started liking new things independently. We even sounded enough alike that when I stayed with Josh, he would sometimes call my mom pretending to be me. His success rate was impressive. My mom would sometimes joke that the only way she could tell us apart sometimes was by our hair. He had straight, dirty blonde hair like his sister, while I had curly, dark brown hair like my mother. One would think that the thing most likely to drive two young friends apart would be what's out of their control. However, I think the catalyst of our gradual disengagement was my insistence that we sneak out to my old house to look for boxes. The next weekend, I invited Josh over to my house, in keeping with our tradition of alternating houses, but he said that he wasn't really feeling up to it. We started seeing progressively less of one another over the next year or so. It had gone from once a week to once a month to once every couple months. For my 12th birthday, my mom threw a party for me. I hadn't made that many friends since we moved, so it wasn't a surprise party since my mom had no idea who to invite. I told the handful of kids I'd become acquainted with and called Josh to see if he wanted to come. Originally, he said that he didn't think he could make it, but the day before the party, he called me to say that he'd be there. I was really excited because I hadn't seen him in several months. The party went really well. My biggest concern was that Josh and the other kids wouldn't get along, but they seemed to like each other well enough. Josh was surprisingly quiet. He hadn't brought me a gift and apologized for that, but I told him it wasn't a big deal. I was just glad that he was able to make it. I tried to start several conversations with him, but they seemed to keep reaching dead ends. I asked him what was wrong. I told him that I didn't get why things had become so awkward between us. They never were like that before. We used to hang out almost every weekend and talk on the phone every couple of days. I asked him what happened to us. He just looked up from staring at his shoes and said, "You left." Just after he said that, my mom yelled in from the other room that it was time to open presents. I forced a smile and walked into the dining room as they sang happy birthday. There were a couple of wrapped boxes and a lot of cards since most of my extended family lived out of state. Most of the gifts were silly and forgettable, but I remember that Brian gave me a Mighty Max toy shaped like a snake that I kept for years afterwards. My mom was insistent that I open all the cards that had been brought and thank each person who had given one because several years before on Christmas, I had torn through the wrapping paper and envelopes with such fervor that I had destroyed any possibility of who's discerning who sent which gifts or what amount of money. We separated the ones that had been sent by mail and the ones that had been brought that day so that my friends wouldn't have to sit through me opening cards from people they had never met. Most of the cards from my friends had a couple dollars in them, and the ones from my family member contained larger bills. One envelope didn't have my name written on it, but it was in the pile, so I opened it. The card had a generic floral pattern on its face and seemed to be a card that had been received by someone else who was now recycling it for my birthday because it was actually a little dingy. What? It was actually a little dingy. I actually appreciated the idea that it was a reused card since I always thought that cards were silly. I angled it so that the money wouldn't fall to the floor when I opened it, but the only thing that was inside the message, the only thing inside was the message that had come printed in the card. I love you. Whoever had given me this card hadn't written anything in it, but they had circled the message in pencil a couple times. I chuckled a little and said, "Gee, thanks for the awesome card, Mom." She looked at me quizzically and then turned her attention to the card. She told me it wasn't from her and seemed amused that she showed my friends, looking at their faces, trying to discern who had played the joke. None of the kids stepped forward, so my mom said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. At least you now know that two people love you." She followed that with an extremely prolonged and excruciating kiss on my forehead that transformed the group's bewilderment into hysteria. They were all laughing, so it could have been any of them, but Mike seemed to be laughing hardest. To become a participant rather than the subject of the gag, I said to him that just because he had given me a card, he shouldn't think that I'd kiss him later. We all laughed, and as I looked at Josh, I saw he was finally smiling. "Well, I think that gift might be the winner, but you still have a couple more to open." My mom slid another present in front of me. I was still feeling the tremors of suppressed chuckles in my abdomen as I tore the colorful paper away. When I saw the gift, I had no need to suppress the laughter anymore. My smile dropped as I looked at what I had been given. It was a pair of walkie-talkies. "Well, go on, show everyone." I held them up, and everyone seemed to approve, but as I drew my attention to Josh, I could see that he had turned a sickly shade of white. We locked eyes for a moment, and then he turned and walked into the kitchen. As I watched him dial a number on the corded phone attached to the wall, my mom whispered in the ear that she knew that Josh and I didn't talk as much since one of the walkie-talkies had broken, so she thought I'd like it. I was filled with an intense appreciation for my mom's thoughtfulness, but this feeling was easily overpowered by the emotions resurrected by the returning memories I tried so hard to bury. When everyone was eating cake, I asked Josh who he had called. He told me he wasn't feeling well, so he called his dad to come get him. I understood that he wanted to leave, but I told him that I wished we could hang out more. I extended one of the walkie-talkies to him, but he put his hand up in refusal. Dejected, I said, "Well, thanks for coming, I guess. I hope I'll see you before my next birthday." "I'm sorry, I'll try to call you back more often. I really will," he said. The conversation stagnated as we waited by my door for his dad. I looked at his face. Josh seemed genuinely remorseful that he hadn't made more of an effort. His mood seemed suddenly bolstered by an idea that had struck him. He told me that he knew what he'd get me for my birthday. It would take a while, but he thought that I would really like it. I told him it wasn't a big deal, but he insisted. He seemed in better spirits and apologized for being such a drag at my party. He said that he was tired, that he hadn't been sleeping well. I asked him why that was, as he opened the door in response to his dad's honking in the driveway. He turned back towards me and waved goodbye as he answered my question. "I think I've been sleepwalking." That was the last time I saw my friend, and a couple months later, he was gone. Over the past several weeks, the relationship between my mother and I has grown increasingly strained due to my attempts to learn the details of my childhood. It's often the case that one cannot know the breaking point of a thing until that thing fractures, And after the last conversation with my mother, I imagine that we will spend the rest of our lives attempting to repair what had taken a lifetime to build. She had put so much energy into keeping me safe, both physically and psychologically, but I think that the walls meant to insulate me from harm were also protecting her emotional stability. As the truth came pouring out the last time we spoke, I could hear a trembling in her voice that I did think was a reverberation of the collapse of her world. I don't imagine my mother and I will talk very much anymore. And while there are still some things I don't understand, I think I know enough. After Josh disappeared, his parents had done all that they could to find him. From the very first day, the police had suggested that they contact all of Josh's friends' parents to see if he was with them. They did this, of course, but no one had seen him or had any idea of where he might be. The police had been unable to turn over any new information about Josh's whereabouts, despite the fact that they had received several anonymous phone calls from a woman urging them to compare this case with the stalking case that had been opened about 6 years before. If Josh's mother's grip on the world loosened when her son vanished, it broke when Veronica died. She had seen many people die at the hospital, but there is no amount of desensitization that can fortify a person against the death of her own child. She would visit Veronica twice a day since she was recuperating at a different hospital, once before her shift and once afterwards. On the day Veronica died, her mother was late leaving work, and by the time she arrived at her daughter's hospital, Veronica had already passed. This was too much for her, and over the next couple of weeks, she would become increasingly more unstable. She would often wander outside yelling for both Josh and Veronica to come home, and there were several times her husband found her wandering around my old neighborhood in the middle of the night, half-clothed and frantically searching for her son and daughter. Due to his wife's mental deterioration, Josh's dad could no longer travel for work and began taking construction jobs that were less well-paying so that he could be closer to home. When they began expanding my old neighborhood more, about 3 months after Veronica died, Josh's dad applied for every position and he was hired. He was qualified to lead the build sites, but he took up a job as a laborer helping to build frames and clean up sites and whatever else was needed. He even took odd jobs that would occasionally come up, mowing lawns, repairing fences, anything that kept him from traveling. They began clearing the woods in the area next to the tributary to transform the land into inhabitable property. Josh's dad was tasked with the responsibility of leveling the recently deforested lot, and this job guaranteed him at least several weeks of work. On the third day, he arrived at a spot that he could not level. Each time he drove over it, it would remain lower than all the surrounding land. Frustrated, he got off the machine to survey the area. He was tempted to simply pack more dirt into the depression, but he knew that would only be an aesthetic and temporary solution. He'd worked construction for years and knew that root systems from large trees that had been recently cut down would often decompose, leaving weaknesses in the soil that would manifest as weaknesses in the foundations above. He weighed his options and elected to dig a little with a shovel in case the problem was shallow enough to fix it without needing a machine that would have to be brought over from another site. And as my mother described where this was, I knew I had been at that spot both before the soil was broken and before it had been filled in. I felt a tightening in my chest. He dug a small hole about 3 feet down until his shovel collided with something hard. He smashed his shovel against it repeatedly in an attempt to gauge the thickness of the root and the density of the network, when suddenly his shovel plunged through the resistance. Confused, he dug the hole wider. After about a half hour of excavating, he found himself standing on a brown blanket-covered box about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. Our minds work hard to avoid dissonance. If we hold a belief strongly enough, our minds will forcefully reject conflicting evidence so that we can maintain the integrity of our understanding of the world. Up until the very next moment, despite what all sense would have indicated, despite the fact that some small but suffocated part of him understood what was supporting his weight, this man believed, he knew, his son was still alive. My mom received a call at 6 p.m. She knew who it was, but she couldn't understand what he was saying. But what she did comprehend made her leave immediately. "Down here. Now, son. Please, God." When she arrived, she found Josh's dad sitting perfectly still with his back to the hole. He was holding the shovel so tightly it seemed that it might snap, and he was staring straight ahead with eyes that looked as lifeless as a shark's. He wouldn't respond to any of her words, and only reacted when she tried to gently take the shovel from him. He dragged his eyes slowly to hers and just said, "I don't understand." He repeated this as if he had forgotten all other words. My mother could hear him still muttering it as she walked past him to look in the hole. She told me she had wished she gouged her eyes out before she faced downwards into that crater, and I told her that I knew what she was about to say and that she need not continue. I looked at her face, and it was expressing a look of such intense despair that it caused my stomach to turn. I realized that she had known this for almost 10 years and was hoping that she'd never have to tell me. As a result, she never came up with a proper arrangement of words to describe what she saw, and as I sit here, I'm met with the same difficulty of articulation. Josh was dead. His face was sunken in and contorted in such a way that it was as if the misery and hopelessness of all the world had been transferred to it. The assaulting smell of decay rose from the crypt, and my mother had to cover her nose and mouth to keep from vomiting. His skin was cracked, almost crocodilian, and a stream of blood that had followed these lines had dried up on his face after pooling and staining the wood around his head. His eyes lay half-lidded, facing straight up. She said by the look of him he had not been long dead, and thus time had not brought the mercy of degradation to ease the pain and terror that was now etched into his face. She said it was as if he had fixed his gaze right on her, his open mouth offering an all-too-late plea for help. The rest of his body, however, wasn't visible. Someone else was covering it. He was large and lay face down on top of Josh, and as my mother's mind stretched itself to take in what her eyes were attempting to tell her, she became aware of the significance of the way in which he laid. He was holding Josh. Their legs lay frozen by death, but entangled like vines in some lush tropical forest. One arm rested under Josh's neck, only to wrap around his body so that they might lay closer still. As the sun passed through the trees, its light became reflected by something pinned to Josh's shirt. My mother stooped to one knee and raised the collar of her shirt over her nose so that she might block out the smell. When she saw what the sun had caught, her legs abandoned her and she nearly fell into the tomb. It was a picture. It was a picture of me as a child. She staggered backwards, gasping and trembling, and collided with Josh's father, who sat facing away from the hole. She understood why he had called her, but she could not bring herself to tell him what she had kept from everyone all these years. Josh's family never knew about the night I had woken up in the woods. She knew now that she should have told them, but to tell them now would help nothing. As she sat there resting her back against Josh's dad's, he spoke. I can't tell my wife. I can't tell her that our little boy... His speech staggered in fits as he pressed his wet face into his dirt-caked hands. She couldn't bear it. After a moment, he stood up, still shuddering, and lumbered towards the grave. With a final stop, he stepped down into the coffin. Josh's dad was a big man, but not as big as the man in the box. He grabbed the back of the man's collar and pulled hard. It was as if he intended to throw the man out of the grave in a singular motion. The collar ripped and the body fell back down on top of his son. You motherfucker! He grabbed the man by the shoulders and heaved him back until he was off of Josh and sat awkwardly but upright against the wall of the grave. He looked at the man and staggered back a step. Oh, God. No, oh God, no, 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 please God, no. In a struggling but powerful movement, he lifted and pushed the corpse completely out of the ground, and they both heard the sound of glass rolling against wood. It was a bottle. He handed it to my mother. It was ether. Oh, Josh, he sobbed. My boy, my baby boy. Why is there so much blood? What did he do to you? As my mother looked at the man who now lay facing upwards, she realized she was facing the person who had haunted our lives for over a decade. She had imagined him so many times, always evil and always terrifying, and the cries of Josh's father seemed to confirm her worst fears. But as she stared at his face, she thought that this didn't look like who she imagined. This was just a man. As she looked at his frozen expression, it actually looked serene. Corners of his lips were turned up only slightly. She saw that he was smiling, not the expected smile of a maniac from a film or horror story, not the smile of a demon or the smile of a fiend. This was a smile of contentment or satisfaction. It was a smile of bliss. It was a smile of love. As she looked down from his face, she saw a tremendous wound on his neck from where the skin had been ripped out. She was at first relieved when she realized that the blood had not been Josh's. Perhaps he had suffered less. But this comfort was short-lived as she realized just how wrong she was. She brought a hand up to her mouth and whispered, almost as if she was afraid to remind the world what had happened. They were alive. Josh must have bitten the man's neck in an attempt to get free, and although the man had died, Josh couldn't move him. I began crying when I thought of how long he might have laid there. She looked through the man's pocket for some kind of identification, but she only found a piece of paper. On it was a drawing of a man holding hands with a small boy, and next to it were initials. My initials. I'd like to think that she was remembering that part of the story incorrectly, but I'll never know for sure. As Josh's father carried his son out of the grave, my mom slid the piece of paper into her pocket. He kept muttering that his son's hair had been dyed. She saw that it had. It was now dark brown, and she noticed that he was dressed oddly. His clothes were far too small. After Josh's dad delicately laid his boy on the soft dirt, he began gently pressing his hands against his son's pants to feel his pockets. He heard a crinkle. Carefully, he retrieved a folded piece of paper from Josh's pocket. He looked at it, but was vexed. Apparently, absently, he handed it to my mother, but she didn't recognize it either. I asked her what it was. She told me it was a map, and I felt my heart shatter. He was finishing the map. That must have been his idea for my birthday present. I found myself strangely hoping he hadn't been taken while expanding it, as if that would somehow matter now. She heard Josh's father grunt and looked to see him pushing the man's body back into the ground. As he walked back towards the machine that had found the spot for him, he put his hand on a canister of gasoline and paused with his back towards my mother. You should go. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. I did this. You can't think like that. There was nothing, he interjected flatly, almost with no emotion at all. About a month ago, a guy approached me as I was cleaning up the site on a new development a block over. He asked me if I wanted to make some extra money, and because my wife's not working right now, I accepted. He told me that some kids had dug a bunch of holes in his property, and he offered me $100 to fill them in. He said that he wanted to take some pictures for the insurance company first, but if I came back after 5 p.m. the next day, that would be fine. I thought the guy was a sucker since I knew clearing that lot was coming up, so someone would have had to do it anyway, but I needed the money, so I agreed. I didn't even think he had $100, but he put the bill in my hand, and I did the job the next day. I've been so exhausted that I didn't even think about it until after it was done. I didn't think about it until today, when I pulled that same guy off my son. He pointed at the grave, and his emotions started to push through as he broke into a sob. He paid me $100 so that I would bury him with my boy. It was as if saying it aloud forced him to accept what had happened, and he collapsed onto the ground in tears. My mother could think of nothing to say, and she stood there in silence for what felt like a lifetime. She finally asked what he would do about Josh. His final resting place won't be here, with this monster. As she looked back when she reached her car, she could see black smoke billowing and diffusing against the amber sky, and she hoped against all hope that Josh's parents would be okay. I left my mom's house without saying much else. I told her that I loved her and that I would talk to her soon, but I don't know what soon means for us. I got in my car and left. I understood now why the events of my childhood had stopped years ago. As an adult, I now saw the connections that were lost in a child who tends to see the world in snapshots rather than a sequence. I thought about Josh. I loved him then, and I love him even still. I miss him more now that I know I'll never see him again, and I find myself wishing that I had hugged him the last time I saw him. I thought about Josh's parents, how much they had lost and how quickly that loss had come. They don't know about my connection to any of this, but I could never look them in the eyes now. I thought about Veronica. I had only really come to know her later in my life, but for those brief few weeks, I think I had really loved her. I thought about my mother. She tried so hard to protect me and was stronger than I would ever be. I tried not to think about the man and what he had done with Josh for more than 2 years. Mostly, I just thought about Josh. Sometimes I wish he had never sat across from me that day in kindergarten, that I'd never known what it was like to have a real friend. Sometimes I'd like to dream that he's in a better place, but that's only a dream, and I know that. The world is a cruel place made crueler still by man. There would be no justice for my friend, no final confrontation, no vengeance. It had been over for almost a decade for everyone but me now. I miss you, Josh. I'm sorry you chose me, but I'll always cherish my memories of you. We were explorers. We were adventurers. We were friends.
Whoa!
End of Penpal.
That's the end of the book. Good work.
Ooh.
Woo. Um, it's a very emotional ending.
Yeah.
It, I mean, obviously I like the decision to not end it with some kind of confrontation or happy ending or anything that trite. But it's definitely got a lot of problems, in my opinion, as an ending.
Mhm.
The whole thing obviously revolves around him describing, his poetic, flowery language is a little bit weird when he's describing events that he's never seen. You know,
Mm.
that part's a little silly. That rings, to me in the same vein of like when he's doing all the intricate dialogue for things that happened, you know, 20 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
he's just going off. It doesn't really. I don't like that part about it. But like, it's like, you know, those descriptions, they needed to be there, but he also knew that
Yeah.
his character couldn't be there. So he's like, fuck, I wrote myself into a corner because I have to make this a really emotional, well-described scene, but there's no way for me to know all this stuff. So he went just ahead and described it anyway.
Mhm.
Here's one thing I
That
go on.
fucking- the fucking twist where it's just like, oh my god, he buried his own son while they were still alive. That's fucking brutal.
Yeah, that's pretty emotional. That's definitely a part I like. Here's something
Another
I
thing is that like,
go on.
oh, another thing that I didn't actually realize until this reading of it,
Hmm.
um, is that because this happens after Veronica, that Josh like when they said like had endured for 2 years, I was like, oh fuck, he'd been like kidnapped and like alive for 2 years before this whole like burial scene even happened. So
Yeah.
that did
Yep.
not register until this reading it around this time, and I'm just like, oh my god.
Yeah. Hmm. I want to get your take on something because I think this is bad, but maybe I'm not totally understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
So at the party, when when the narrator tries to make conversation with Josh and eventually gives up and asks him why they're not close anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Josh says, "You left." And I heard that and I started thinking I was like, "No, he didn't." You know what I mean? Like he stayed behind to pull Josh out of the house in boxes. He stayed behind after Josh ran away in maps.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, he didn't leave. That's not true. That doesn't
Yeah.
really make any sense for him to say. Why did he say that?
I think it's just like supposed to be a fun line or
I
something.
mean, it's not
I
fun.
don't know.
It doesn't make sense. It's not a good reason for them to have separated. You
Yeah.
know, the narrator never, ever like did anything to screw over Josh. He doesn't have any legitimate grievances with him, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's like, they're kids. Like the way that their blame system works is kind of different.
Maybe, but it's a pretty big, it's a pretty big point to just not happen for any reason, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a rocky ending. But
Mm,
we got through it. We finished the book. That's
yeah.
exciting.
Everyone's asleep right now, so I couldn't like scream into the voice acting, unfortunately. But
That's all
that's for the
right. That's
Oscar release.
okay. Believe that's okay. Um,
the part where like the verb choice was degraded, I was like, this that I understand what you're trying to say, but I don't think this is the right verb for this context.
yeah, he had a few Redditor moments with his grammar and stuff. That's all right. I don't know. I don't know if anybody named Dathan Auerbach is a native English speaker. I don't know. It sounds European to
That's
me.
yeah,
um, well, normally, sorry. Did you have any concluding thoughts? I was gonna move on.
Dathan.
Dathan. Dathan. Okay. Um, normally, I tend to, or at least something I'm trying to do, is at the end of a book, announce the next book. But since we're not live, doing that doesn't really have the same impact. Maybe I should
Eh,
wait, or maybe I should announce it now and let people see it on YouTube. What do you think?
I would say save it for like mystery guest reveal at the start of the next stream, probably.
Well, we're not start. Remember, we're not reading it until May. I'm taking a few weeks to do other things.
Right.
I gotta get through finals.
Now just pub the book, but not the reader.
Plug the book, but not the reader. You think that's what I should do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Get ready next month with special guest star mystery, mystery, mystery.
get next month with a mystery special guest star. The next book that we will be reading is called Mort.
Ooh.
It's a book by Terry Pratchett, New York Times
Ooh.
bestseller, and best fantasy author ever to live, in my opinion. Uh,
True.
should we read the back?
If you want.
Come on, you gotta help me here. Should we read the back or not?
Yes.
Okay, now give me a confident yes, please. Go, yes,
Yes.
yes. Okay.
Yeah. Woo. Yeah.
Here's the summary on the back of the book. Death comes to everyone eventually on Discworld, and now he's come to Mort with an offer no young man can refuse. He literally can't refuse it, since being dead isn't exactly compulsory. It's actually a pretty good deal. As Death's apprentice, Mort will have free board and lodging. He'll get use of the company horse, and he won't have to take any time off for family funerals. But despite the obvious perks, young Mort is about to discover that there is a serious downside to working for the Reaper, because this perfect job can be a killer on one's love life.
Ah.
So we're going to be reading Mort by Terry Pratchett with a guest reader. And I'm very excited. This is my favorite Terry Pratchett book. And I think it might be this person's favorite Terry Pratchett book either. They, as well, I mean, they actually picked it out. And I was like, wow, you want to read that? That's a fantastic choice. It didn't even occur to me. And so I went out of my way to pick up a physical copy. I've got it here. Smell that.
Oh, that smells good. Oh
Yeah.
my god, it's got that new.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So that will be probably in May. We'll start that. Um, and maybe
Nice.
we'll stream video games or stupid stuff for the next couple weeks so that I can get through finals. Maybe a birthday stream.
Woo.
I got a few ideas for a birthday stream. Don't get too excited. There's nothing special. I don't have the time to put together a massive extravaganza like I did last year.
Mm.
But we'll do something. We'll do something unusual.
What if I made you a Minecraft map?
A Minecraft map? I don't think you can do that in 15 days with the workload that you've currently got.
That's fair. But what if it was just like really bad
maybe
and
just
shitty?
maybe you should get started on my 23rd birthday Minecraft map now, and then I'll definitely play it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the announcement. Thank you
Wait,
for
wait,
go on.
you're turning 22?
Yes.
I'm older than you?
Aren't you a couple months older than me? I feel like we discussed this.
Oh my god, I'm older than you.
I know I definitely know that we talked about this.
Oh my god.
Here we go. On on January 26th, 2021, we discussed
Mm-hmm.
this.
Did I react the exact same way I'm acting now?
Yes. Yes, you did.
Yeah. Damn.
Well,
Dude, you're 21. You're like a baby.
I feel like
You're like a little bean.
you are 2 months older than me. Is that what it is? Yeah, it's 2 months.
You're my little PogChamp. Oh my god.
All right. We're gonna go ahead and bring the stream to an end now. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Crad, and thank you to everyone who stuck around through this messier than usual book production.
Never read a creepypasta, folks.
Never. You shouldn't read a creepypasta. You shouldn't read one on the internet. You shouldn't read one in a book. You shouldn't read one to your friends. You shouldn't read creepypastas.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we learned. And Mort is no creepypasta. So don't. It's a real
Ooh.
book, so we won't have to fucking worry about that. I have read it, but I read it when I was.
You have read it? Oh
I
my
have
god.
read it. I read it. Well, I think when I was 17, so I really don't remember most of it.
Oh my god, you're 17? You're like a little baby.
I'm turning 17, Crad.
You're turning 17. Oh my god, that means you're 16.
No, I mean, I'm basically 17. I'm 17 in 15 days. Okay, let's
No, you're
calm down.
16.
I'm
God.
basically 17. You know, think about how long a life is compared to that
Mm.
15 days, 16 days, whatever it fucking is. But that's all we have for you tonight. This has been Pen Pal.
Pen pal.
Thank you to everyone. And next week we will be back with whatever I come up with 20 minutes before we go live. So that'll be exciting.
Woo! Yeah.
Goodbye. Good night. Don't have a stalker is the moral of this
Don't
story.
have.
That's the moral of Pen Pal is don't have a stalker.
Oh my god.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.